So, welcome everybody to our second session in today's Academic Integrity Awareness Day. Today's session is a little bit different from the other two sessions today in that it is actually a discussion panel for staff. And so we're going to cover a number of different topics and issues that are hopefully burning in your heart in relation to how to promote and embed good academic integrity practices across your courses, your curriculum, and for your students. My name is Bhavani Kannan, and I am a learning advisor with the ANU Library Academic Skills team. And it is my great pleasure to be your MC or host for this session. Just as a quick reminder, we are recording this session for integrity purposes, but also to make this recording available to our colleagues who were not able to join us today. We understand that people have got their own teaching commitments as well at the same time. Before we do get started, I would like to start with a quick acknowledgement of country. Daura nuna wo, yangu nalamanyan duni manyan. Nunawo wari, daura wari, dindi, wangiralit jinyin. We acknowledge and celebrate the traditional custodians of all the lands and airwaves that you're joining us from today. For those of you who are here in Canberra, we come to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands, and we pay respect to their elders, past and present. So in this discussion panel, we're going to start off today with a quick introduction where we're going to make sure we're all on the same page in relation to what do we actually mean by academic integrity, what do we hope to get out of this particular session, and what are perhaps some of our experiences in this area so far, positives and some of those challenges as well. We'll then move on to our panel, who are going to explore some key themes in educational design in relation to academic integrity. Towards the end of the panel session, we will open up the discussion to you, the participants, where you can feel free to ask the panel anything you'd like in relation to academic integrity, in case there's something they haven't already covered earlier on. Before we wrap up quickly with some resources to help guide you beyond this session with the rest of your academic integrity practices for the rest of the semester and beyond. So who do we have on our fantastic panel today? We have an excellent list, a wide variety from across ANU, so a lot of representation and diversity. So first of all, we are joined by Professor Royston Gustafsson, who is the Dean of Academic Quality at ANU. We're joined by Tara Starbird, Manager of Academic Competencies and Digital Capabilities from ANU Scholarly Information Services. Dr. Natalie Lloyd, the Associate Dean of Education at KEX. Natalie will be joining us a little bit later. She is juggling multiple commitments today. Associate Professor Wayne Morgan, who is the ADE at the ANU College of Law. We've got Dr. Bernardo Nunez, Sub-Dean of Academic Integrity at KEX. Dr. Shameen Black from the School of Culture, History and Languages in CAP. Dr. Lucy Neve, Associate Dean of Student Experience and Integrity in CAS. Associate Professor Marvin Wee, Director of Students and Learning at CBE. And we're also particularly lucky today to have some student perspectives to contribute to our discussion as well. So please make welcome Hassan Riaz from ANUSA and Tristan Yip and Gunjan Dixit from PASA. All right, so let's talk academic integrity. We'd like you to please head across to www.menti.com, use the numeric code that is there on the screen, and share with us in the first instance, what are some of the most common types of academic integrity issues or challenges that you face in your disciplines? Now, this question is a word cloud, so if you have a multi-word response, please connect your words together with a hyphen or an underscore. So I'll keep the screen up a little bit longer so that everyone can see the details to jump across. That information is also available in the chat. And when you're ready, please share with everybody what are some of the most common forms of academic misconduct in your disciplines. Panel, I invite you to contribute as well, since you also have a wealth of experience in this area. Feel free to submit as many times as you would like. If you can come up with a number of academic misconduct challenges in your discipline. Keep going if you're still contributing to this word cloud. But let's start having a look at some of these responses so far. So the two biggest concerns that we have in this group today are collusion and plagiarism. And this is something that we're definitely going to address a bit more, not only in our panel discussion today, but also in our final session in this afternoon with a guest speech by Dr. Rowena Harper. But we also have some other aspects of academic misconduct as well, including collaboration, cheating in various contexts, whether it's exams, quizzes, self-plagiarism or reusing, recycling previous work. Ghostwriting has definitely been a rising challenge across a number of universities across Australia and the world. Tara, are there any other responses that are coming up today that are particularly drawing your attention or that you're perhaps surprised to find on this list?
Honestly, it's just, I think how complex it is what's really the most telling thing. That yes, we've got the standard collusion, plagiarism, but that I think in the digital age, we're just getting so many, multimodal ways to do things. They're clever, students, and there's just, I think it's just showing the diversity of academic misconduct compared to in the past where, you could perhaps get someone to write your essay for you, but it wasn't as organized. And yeah, AI coming into it as well is quite, alarming. We talk about how long until we have an AI winning a Nobel Prize, and it really becomes complex. Yeah, for me, I think the complexity is what I'm seeing here. Just so many different types of academic misconduct now.
Absolutely, thanks, Tara. And what that does mean is that no matter what types of assessment you do, no matter how you design your course, academic integrity is going to be a crucial thing to consider for everybody here today. Okay, we have one more question as well before we do move on to our panel. And that is, what types of academic integrity instruction or resources are promoted within your discipline? This is not a word cloud, this is free text. I think you have up to about 240 characters. So feel free to share with us what you currently are seeing or doing in your discipline in relation to academic integrity, instruction, and resources. Again, some excellent responses coming through. Keep going if you are still typing, but we've got a lot of links to various resources across ANU platforms, whether it's through Wattle, Turnitin, ANU's website. talking to academic skills, a bit of self-promotion, but absolutely, we actually do get to work either closely one-on-one with students in relation to helping them to improve their academic integrity practices, or by delivering workshops to larger groups, if that's valuable to your class. Providing really clear and explicit instructions before assignments about AI in particular, but also just academic integrity practices more generally. Actually, I'm not quite sure if the AI in that context means academic integrity or artificial intelligence, but we'll use it to mean both. Assessment design, absolutely. Carleen Dickens spoke about this a bit earlier on in this morning session. Recording will be available later on in case you missed that, to get some fantastic tips about assessment design. And perhaps that we don't do enough. Okay, and this is a reason why we have these academic integrity awareness days, to help equip staff, you, to be better prepared with information, but also instruction and resources to really try to embed and encourage academic integrity practices across your colleges, courses, and disciplines. All right, I'm just going to switch back to the slides again, and then we might get on with our panel. Now, for our panel, we do have a number of questions for them, and we'd love to actually invite the rest of the attendees today to actually join the conversation. So if you head across to Padlet, the link is going into the chat right now. You do not need an account to sign in or anything like that. You can just click on the link and enter, join the conversation anonymously. And we'd love you to either ask questions for the panel under each question, or share your own experiences or challenges to join this conversation and make this conversation as valuable as possible for all of us. All right, so let's move on to our first question. And that is, while there are consequences for academic misconduct, what incentives can we use to best support a culture of scholarly integrity and ethics? So rather than the stick, what can we use as a carrot? And I might start things off by going to Lucy. Lucy, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think my position in CAS is slightly different, maybe from areas in science and College of Engineering and Computer Science. But my sense is that most students who engage in academic misconduct are doing it out of desperation, and that they feel really bad about the fact that they have actually transgressed university rules. And so I think in terms of incentives, it's about actually making it really easy for students to do their work with integrity through a range of measures. So I think it's often about just giving people a lot of time for their assessment, making sure that the assessment's really well scaffolded and students are clear about what they've got to do, and also giving really clear modelling kind of integrity as a lecturer or as a course convener, and giving some really clear guidance to students about things like referencing, things like how to paraphrase, especially at first year level, things like, the fact that you really do need to acknowledge if you're using someone else's ideas, even if you're changing the wording. Some of this really basic stuff students don't know. And if you're really clear about that early in courses, it can help, because students actually feel a lot better if they do the work properly themselves, rather than cheating or plagiarizing material.
Thanks for that, Lucy. Marvin, did you have anything to add to that, perhaps from a CVE perspective?
Yeah, so I think Lucy touched on the point about whether the students are doing these out of desperation. When I look at academic misconduct, and in the cases that I handle as the Director for Student and Learning, it spans, I guess, from plagiarism to collusion to outright cheating. And I think the plagiarism part is perhaps the stuff that we could do a little bit more on, and in terms of putting incentives in place. Some of the things that I did in my own courses, and I didn't actually think of it as incentives, but for example, structuring an assessment so that the students submit, or we teach the students how to use EndNote. So, and then I got them to actually submit a list of references that they've looked at. So it's by building on those skills and actually rewarding them for doing those tasks at the beginning. I thought that it helped them at the end when they come to submit the full essay or assignment that, these are things that they've already done. It was easy. So they didn't have to then struggle with that part in terms of doing the referencing. So I think we can put incentives in place, but we don't think of it, when we design our assessments, and sometimes we do these things sort of subconsciously. But I think we could do this. We could be more conscious about designing our assessment. I know that you're going to talk about that later in those questions. But having those structures in place so that we actually reward the students for having the right behavior, I think it's a really good strategy.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marvin. And perhaps if you wouldn't mind elaborating, how do you reward your students? Is it purely from having grades associated to these earlier parts of the assessment, or is there some other way that you reward the students?
Yeah, so some of the things that I've done, so the references there's actually a component of the final assignment that was carved out just for that. So they get rewarded in terms of 5% for the whole entire assignment for that list of references that they produce and the EndNote library that they actually sent me, so that I could look through to see what notes they've actually written up for those articles that they're reading. In some of the other assessments that I've used for larger classes, non-research type classes, I show them the rubrics, and within the rubrics itself, there is a component that is for using in-text citation and also providing a list of references. And there's a small component that's allocated to that, and so it's very clear to the students. Those are the things I'm looking for when I'm marking the assignment, so they're aware of having to put those things in.
Thanks, Marvin. And this goes back to a suggestion somebody put on our Mentee about how we could really do more with at the instruction phase, including going through the rubric to help communicate to students how they can really engage in positive academic integrity practices. Tristan, did you have anything to add from perhaps a student perspective here?
Yeah, and I think that that sort of empowerment that Lucy and Marvin have talked about of having these. Can you hear me? By the way, excellent. Of having those sort of academic integrity resources available, and I suppose brought to the attention of students is really helpful. One of the most important things I've found in my degree is actually the enterprise version of EndNote, which the library provides to all students free of charge, and that's a really good way of encouraging me to reference properly and to ensure that I'm not taking from people's work without properly acknowledging it. So yeah, all those sorts of incentives and tools, when those are made available to students, those are a really good way of ensuring that we're not committing academic misconduct inadvertently.
Thanks for that, Tristan. Would anybody else from our panel like to share their perspectives on this? And perhaps while we're waiting for anybody else to, sorry, Bernardo, you go first, and then Tara, you can let us know if there's anything on the Padlet as well.
I just want to talk a little bit about the computer science perspective, because one of the concepts we teach in software engineering is reuse, right? So that's it's a point where when I teach this concept, I try to, of course, make links to academic integrity and understand that, of course, it is good to use, and they will probably get a piece of software that will be tested and robust, and they can rely on them, and they can build better software. But of course, they have to, it's part of the rubric, as our colleague said as well in our courses. But yeah, I think the incentive is to say that they don't have to repeat everything. It's there, they can reuse. And we also acknowledge their choices, right? So this piece of software is better than the other one, and they would do like similar things, but they chose the best one for that context. So that's part of the rubric.
Thanks for that, Bernardo.
Yeah, lots going on in the Padlet, Bhavani. This one column is very full. So just I think some of the really interesting things, I guess it's not named by anyone, so I'll just read them, is early feedback and guidance. So, that's sort of, I guess, not really seen as like an incentive, but it is, because it's giving students that sort of support where they need it and as they're progressing in their skills. And, so that gives them more guidance throughout the process. Cinematic care for students, talking about staffing issues as well, like with time. And yeah, there is an increased pastoral care element to all teaching, even what academic skills does. I would say we've definitely found an increase since the pandemic of students needing a whole of student solution, not just, you know, a stopgap in terms of a professional solution. So yeah, I think it's just looking at ways to show, like, incentivize it as well for their career and their profession. Like, if you want a scholarly, reputable career, you know, this is where you start. I do a managing your digital footprint session during O Week and a few times throughout the year. And one of the things I do show is the story of a few of those German politicians who had it discovered that they had used an exam, it was an assignment writing tool, and a whole bunch of them had to resign. And that really gets students who are, you know, more career minded and do, you know, want a professional career to really think about those long-term consequences of something you do in university impacting your career, 10, 20 plus years in the future. So I don't know if that's really an incentive, but, you know, looking at their career and their professional identity is also an incentive. Is, you know, what kind of person do you want to be? You know, how, you know, do you want a professional, you know, with reputation? Sorry, still recovering from COVID, so my vocabulary is not fantastic. Yeah, so lots of activity in the Padlet on this one.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara, and thank you everyone for contributing to that Padlet. Let's move on to question 2, but if you still have more thoughts or experiences to share with question 1, add them to the Padlet and we can always come back to that a little bit later on. So for question 2, how can design at an instructional, assessment and course levels successfully reduce academic misconduct? So a big one, and I might start with Shamim here.
Okay, let's see, is this audible at this point? Okay, great. So I guess one thing that that I'm a big believer of in course design is really bringing work on assessments into actual course space. So, for example, in a class that I convene, we have parts of class time that are devoted to traditional discussion, and these are courses in gender and cultural studies, so they are humanistic methods. But we always make sure to have part of the time as a workshop where I get students to think about the assessments, well in advance. So it's like this week, okay, what's the question you might be working on for your research essay, for example, and the next week, perhaps it's bring in an outline or even a rough draft, and we have peer feedback and so forth. And so I really try to stress, I guess the goal, I think, is to stress to students that assessments aren't just something that you do on your own outside of class in positions where some students may feel that they aren't sure how to go about it and they don't have any support, which leads them then perhaps to make some poor choices about, how to meet these expectations. But instead, it gives me a lot more insight into walking around the room and seeing where students are in their thinking. I can help them and answer a lot of questions in ways that they might not come to office hours for. And it also really allows, I think, a positive culture of students helping each other and developing their own skills by the very act of having to look at somebody else's emerging assessment. And so I feel like that, devoting the class space to doing that has really paid, for me, it has paid dividends in the point where I no longer expect to see academic misconduct in these kinds of courses in ways that, when I first started teaching and didn't have this, there generally would be higher levels.
Thanks, Shamim. Some really great ideas there about creating a conducive environment for that. So fantastic. Bernardo, how do you do things in KEX? Sorry, Bernardo, you are still muted.
Okay, now you can hear me possibly. Yeah, okay, good. So I guess I split this in these 3 different levels. And then I guess one of the ways is when we are building these learning materials, we involve students in the process, right? They are part of the process, and we need to understand or prepare the materials according to their needs and their difficulties to understand what is being taught. So in computer science or KEX, sometimes we have, not only there, but like it's very common to have like abstract concepts that is very difficult for them to link to concrete or tangible examples. So make them part of it, understanding, acknowledging that these concepts are abstract and showing them more concrete examples, helping them understand that would definitely help build confidence, and then it would help to reduce academic misconduct. So at the assessment level, I guess we always talk about time, and we always talk about time management, and how the duration of the task would influence academic integrity. But also, I think that we need to consider as well that the time students need to consolidate what we teach them. So not only like how long this task will take, but like think that we need to go from understanding to how they can apply that knowledge later. So if they don't feel comfortable again or confident enough to apply that, this will probably end up in some kind of a misconduct, possibly, right? So yeah, and then for this is basically in my course, what I try to do is to use different types of assessment. So go from diagnostic to formative, and then end up in a summative assessment that will not only help me what I can expect, what they know, what they don't know, and what I can ask later, but also it will help them to understand what we are expecting from them at the end of the course, for example. At the course level, I guess the main importance in my specific course then is to show them that the topics that I address, they are helping them to get new skills, and they are useful later in their life. So it's good for employability. So they know that if they don't learn these, there might be a gap in the future. So I guess these would reduce academic misconduct.
Thanks, Bernardo. Marvin, do you have anything, a different perspective on this?
I think the previous two speakers talked about quite a number of points I was going to raise, but I thought with this question, we perhaps could actually even flip it around, and instead of thinking about how can design successfully reduce academic misconduct, we can think about how can we design our instructional material and assessment to actually promote good academic conduct in terms of what are the things that we could do. For example, in assessments, we could design assessments, and this was actually talked about earlier at the 10 o'clock session, but we could design assessments so that it's not testing regurgitation, for example, so that students can't just go onto the internet and lift a whole bunch of material and reproduce that. Using case studies, for example, where the content is very specific to this year's assessment, but the students have to think about what's in the case. Of course, that's not going to prevent students from colluding, because that still can happen. But we need to set it up so that we can encourage better academic conduct, rather than how do I identify those misconducts. So that's really my only point to add.
Thanks, Marvin. I love the idea of reframing that and flipping it around about encouraging and embracing positive academic integrity practices rather than reducing academic misconduct. Lucy, would you like to add anything else to this question?
I guess I can just say that similarly to Shamim's point, in my discipline and in other disciplines in CASs, there's quite a lot of portfolio work so that students actually submit evidence of having completed drafts, or or in the School of Art, for example, obviously they have material that they can show that's worked towards their final projects. And that is another way to, while you're also working with students, sometimes in workshops or in settings where students are doing some of the work in class, you're also ensuring that you can see a work's trajectory. And there's also things you can do with annotated bibliographies, I think similar to what Marvin was saying. So, you ask students to do an annotated bibliography first, and then to develop work from that annotated bibliography. So I guess they're just two practical solutions, but I think in both cases, you're supporting students in terms of helping them to work with integrity, and often that reduces academic misconduct, but it's sort of a side, a kind of a result that you're more seeking to help students understand what they're doing and work with integrity really than trying to kind of prevent academic misconduct, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Lucy. And it looks like we've also got similar ideas happening on the Padlet as well. So do keep those ideas coming, because this is a great way of us to build a collective database of or resource of ideas for us to implement ourselves in our own teaching. All right, moving on then to question 3. So what are some strategic approaches that could be adopted to assessment task design to improve academic integrity? And I think some of our panelists have already started to allude to some of this in the earlier question. So I might start with Wayne.
Hi, everyone. Yes, this question is very similar to the previous one, but a couple of thoughts. Sometimes I think, in law, we're not really known for our creativity, but I think that's perhaps a bit of a misnomer. And one of the things that I find really helps in terms of minimizing problems with academic integrity is to allow students to be creative in terms of the assessment that they undertake. Now, that might be a range of things. For example, something as simple as allowing them to do a podcast, which can still be research-based, rather than, a traditional research essay. It might also, for example, be allowing them to, and this partly, helps to deal with issues like collusion, allow them, if they want to form a group to produce that research task. They can control who is in their group, how many people are in their group, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes that creativity, depending upon the law course, can go even as far as things like, well, engage in some creative writing that you hope reflects a legal problem. And that might, again, include, say, a more academic commentary that is research-based about what the student was hoping to achieve. But creativity in and allowing students' creativity in assessment, I find really helps. The other two things that I might mention, although both of these, again, they have costs in terms of the amount of time and effort that has to be devoted to them. One thing that can be really useful in some law courses is simulations. So, for example, in international law courses, we can simulate. I teach courses in world trade law, so we can simulate negotiating a trade issue. And get students, again, to reflect perhaps upon that process and mark them on the reflection. The third thing, and this links to, there's a lot of literature out there about authentic assessment. This links to what I would call, authentic assessment, and, something I'll designate problem-solving project management. And again, just to give you an example of what this might be. So I also teach the compulsory course in property law. And of course, in property law now, we have had more than 20 years of the existence of native title. And so I might say to the students, okay, the government is interested in reviewing our native title regime and how it interacts with other types of land title. How would you go about designing a research project that would answer some of the questions that the government is interested in? So that would include things like, well, who are you going to talk to? Who are the participants going to be? What resources do you need in terms of research? How do you identify, the problems that occur in the area? How do you go about looking for solutions to those problems? So students, when they can connect with what they see as, authentic tasks within the legal regime, again, we find this is something that helps to minimise academic integrity issues. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Wayne. And it sounds like perhaps a common theme under those different approaches, whether it's simulations, authentic assessment, creativity, is perhaps equipping students to have greater autonomy in their assessment. Royston, would you like to perhaps add to this about some strategic approaches to adopting assessment task designs?
I think some of you have heard me speak before about scaffold assessment, about having so that you split out an assessment item up into multiple submission points, such as an essay with an annotated bibliography, a research plan. There could be a class presentation with feedback that can be incorporated, into the final product, and so on. This helps students manage their time, because as has already been mentioned, time management's a really critical issue, and students who reach academic integrity usually don't want to, but sometimes time management leaves them in a position where they feel that there's no other choice. There's always another choice. There's always the option of talking to your course convener, seeking various other assistance, but designing the assessment, scaffold assessment can really help with that. Other thing, of course, is to try and design new assessment items every time you run a course, and not to simply reuse the same assessment items from year to year. This is particularly important with exams. And as I mentioned, for those of you that weren't in the opening session, some staff try and lock down their exams and say, well, my exam's not in circulation, therefore I can reuse it. But we have anecdotal evidence, and that's been heard from multiple people, that groups of students get together, go into an exam, and they each memorize part of the exam, they come out of the exam and they reconstruct the paper, and then they can swap it with other people who have got a reconstructed paper for a course that they're doing. So even if you think that you've tried to lock down your exam, it is likely to be in circulation. I say we have anecdotal evidence because we don't have enough evidence to pursue this through the university's rules. But be aware that there are no exams that are locked down. And then it becomes unfair if some students get to see copies of papers that others can't. So please write new exam papers and deposit all the old paper, the previous papers in the university library, because again, that reduces students' stress if they can see multiple exam papers and have got some idea what to expect, because fear of the unknown, not knowing what the paper looks like, is really stressful and drives people to search for copies.
Thanks, Royston. Tara, how are things looking on the Padlet? Do we have any other suggestions? I know that in the chat, Bernardo's been sharing some fantastic videos that his students have been doing as a form of adopting assessment task design to improve academic integrity.
Yeah, I think it's mostly about, more range of choices and submissions. So not just, standard essay exam that is quite common. All of us who are older will be familiar with that because that was our undergraduate life. But yeah, looking at sort of more diversity in mode of submission is a big one. And, I think I put one in here. I did a master's through QUT, and they had rolling deadlines for master's students. So it was a 2-week window. They said, if you need an extension beyond the 2-week window, talk to us. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And honestly, for the most part, everyone submitted on time. It was just that odd time when, you have children, a job, and trying to do a master's where you were a few days late. And it didn't really impact them because the majority of them were still being marked by the time you got yours in. And you can imagine that here, like it's very revolutionary. But as someone who was a parent and studying, it was the only way I could have gotten through a master's, was that understanding of the complex work-life balance I was trying to achieve in doing a master's. So yeah, I think like increased flexibility is something, I know it's not very standard at ANU, but if we're looking at diversity of submissions, looking at also, why are we getting this assessment done? What is the purpose? Why do we have such a hard deadline for everything? So yeah, it was an interesting thing. I haven't seen another university do it, but QUT still conducts it for postgrad.
Thanks for that, Tara. I do know that a couple of other universities around Australia do have a similar type of approach, and Lucy shared that some academics are implementing a similar approach in CAS already. So I think it's a great reminder that when we're thinking about assessment design, it's not just the assessment task, but also the bigger picture about everything related to assessment. Okay, let's move on to our next question, and that is, do you agree that students are less likely to cheat or commit academic misconduct if they feel that the playing field is fair? And we might actually start with student perspective here. So Tristan.
Yeah, thanks, Bhavani. And I probably, mostly disagree with that question actually, to the extent that I think, the impact is likely to be very, very marginal. In that, university assessments aren't generally ranked or visibly ranked. So as a student, I can never see, what the rest of the cohort got in relation to me. I can sort of guess at it. But, I'll never have a really broad perspective of, where I sit in the hierarchy. I might know, what some of the students around me have, but it's, that's only going to be, up to maybe 5 to 10 students. And so, you know, knowing that there's a level playing field doesn't really make much of an incentive because I don't know where I sit in the playing field and whether, you know, I would have increased my mark had more robust academic integrity measures been in place. I think where the incentive does come in is if, as a student, I don't have colleagues who are committing academic misconduct and telling me about it. Because if there is that sort of sense that people I know are able to get away with it and get higher marks, then, you know, I might see that as an opportunity myself to use the same measure, the same academic misconduct behavior they're partaking in, and you know, use that to boost my marks as well.
Thanks, Tristan. And we might bring in and welcome Natalie, who's able to join us now. Natalie, you might need to accept being a panelist so that you can actually unmute yourself to speak. There we go. And when you're ready, Natalie, you'll also need to unmute yourself. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Sorry, I was chipping in the chat. So thank you, Bhavani, and apologies for joining the panel late due to a conflicting meeting. Yeah, do I agree that students are less likely to cheat or commit academic misconduct if they feel the playing field is fair? I have to relate this to research that was conducted about academic integrity and the drivers that lower the barriers for students to engage in academic misconduct. So if one of those lowering of the barriers is this sense of fair play and also the value of the assessment, if students are feeling that the assessment is trivial in terms of the effort required or the reward for effort, then that does lower the barrier to engagement in academic misconduct. And so I think around this conversation, it's important to realise that there are multiple barriers, but our actions as academics can lower or raise those barriers. So it's, what's the hurdle for me to engage in academic misconduct? If it's very low, e.g. recycled assessments, a sense that I know some students are already colluding and working together and not being penalised for it, all of these can contribute to the mindset of whether I am going to commit academic misconduct or not.
Thanks, Natalie. And Bernardo, did you have anything else to add to this?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with both, actually, Tristan and Natalie, in their perspectives. And revising the literature, one of the factors that motivates students is competition. And I guess this is very aligned with the what Tristan said. So yeah, it's more about like building the culture of academic integrity than actually only the playing field being fair, so that they don't take, so some of them will take advantage of these being fair, and then because they are motivated by other factors to get higher grades, etc., they will engage in this kind of actions or cheating. So the main thing, I guess, for us would be to build the highest standards of academic integrity and this culture among students. So as Tristan said, like if everybody is in the same, are aligned, so that it's less likely to cheat or commit this misconduct.
Thanks, everybody. Let's keep this conversation going by moving on to our next question. And this one is now going to specifically focus on exams. So what are some strategic approaches to exam design in your disciplines that have better promoted academic integrity? And Royston, we might start with you. So do you have any additional ideas specifically related to exams and exam design?
something that I've done in the past when I've had smaller courses where I've been doing all of the marking myself. So, in classes of up to about 60 students, has been, rather than a formal exam, have a recorded viva voce exam. I think you can explore a very significant amount during, say, a 20-minute viva voce. And you have to balance this against, the amount of time taken to mark exams. So, and I found that it was, certainly far more enjoyable for me as an examiner to be, engaging with and interacting a person and having a conversation than, simply marking a written exam paper. It also means that, it takes a bit of the luck out of the questions as well, because if someone doesn't know, clearly can't answer a question now, you can ask them something else. So it's about exploring how much somebody knows, as distinct from exploring whether or not they happen to know the particular questions that you set for the exam paper. So, that's something that could be considered for smaller courses. It takes a lot of time, and you probably need to have, to train someone up in that area takes, quite a lot of effort, but it's a different sort of exam that can be very, engaging for both parties.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Royston. Gunjan, what have you been hearing from our postgraduate students?
Thanks, Bhavani. I guess one thing which Royston already mentioned about was that avoiding the redundant method of preparing the questions for exams, because if students have had access to the previous year's questions, they would expect something similar. And I don't think that's a fair way to go for the exams. And the other thing is making the question sets that are very unique per semester. So maybe including like sort of scenario questions which don't really have a fixed answer, but wherein like students have to formulate the answers and like, applying their knowledge towards it. So I think that would be a good thing. And one other option is keeping flexible grading. So if the student has an opportunity of, suppose, taking the best of 5 out of 6 or something like that, then they are like they might be more serious towards it, and they probably focus on the academic integrity.
Thanks for that, Gunjan. Definitely hearing a bit of a recurring theme from all of our panelists about flexibility, creativity, and autonomy for students. Natalie, did you have anything else to perhaps add in relation to exam design?
Thanks, Bhavani. I was tip-tapping away there in the Padlet, but yes, one of the strategies that I found useful, particularly in engineering management and also applied engineering and information technology, is having exam questions that draw on individual assessments throughout the semester. So for example, you might have had a group or team assessment or a project-based assessment during the semester, but the exam question asks the student to draw lessons learnt from the feedback on their assessment. And that was very useful. It was a take-home exam, but the need to refer back to the learning that has engaged the students and the feedback that has been directed to the students individually and as team members meant that it is not something that was readily outsourceable or that could readily be searched on Google or standard answer banks for a question, because it was relying on self-reflection and stepping over and above what had already been learnt during the semester. And so often our exams are really examining recall of factual information rather than the higher order thinking skills. So it's framing those exam questions or the exam design to challenge our higher thinking rather than recall or fundamental skills.
Thanks for that, Natalie. Do keep those ideas and suggestions coming on Padlet. We will come back to that a little bit later. But moving on to question 6, and this really does flow on nicely from this idea about involving students more. So how can we involve students more in assessment design? And we might start again from the student perspective. So Gunjan and Tristan.
Did you want me to go first, Gunjan? Oh, good. So yeah, I think as someone's put in the Padlet, feedback and listening to student feedback is probably, the #1 way we can get students more involved in assessment design. Obviously we sort of have strong views about, where assessments could be, made more accessible or more stimulating, more creative. I think the podcast idea that Wayne was talking about several minutes ago was a really nice idea, and is a good way of getting student feedback involved in making assessments more exciting. I think another way of making students feel more involved in that process is by simply making sure that when assessments are designed, it's very clear to students why that assessment was put in place in the first instance. So making sure that they don't seem just sort of like arbitrary assessments or assessments for the sake of providing a mark to the student. So I suppose as a bit of an example, in my undergraduate, I took literary Chinese as a course. And one of the things, sort of assessments I had in literary Chinese was these very incredibly tight timed tests. And while I suppose those were great for the conveners in terms of assigning a mark to all of us, it also seemed kind of arbitrary because when you're doing a literary Chinese translation, you're never going to be under that sort of time pressure where you have to translate a whole paragraph in 30 minutes. So just those sorts of little things.
Thanks, Tristan. And Gunjan?
Yeah, I almost have like similar points what Tristan said. So the first thing was, the creative ways to present their learning, podcast, or be a poster, video, story, presentation, or any of those methods which they can use in creative ways. The second thing would be self-assessment or peer assessment, provided they are given like a very clear marking guide. So I think that can also be one step where we involve students in the assessment. And I guess one last thing would be that providing the feedback before the grading, so that they can implement that within their like final assessment thing. So these are the 3 points from me. Thank you.
Some great suggestions there. Thank you, Gunjan and Tristan. Panelists, I know you have a lot to say about this topic, so feel free to share your thoughts on the Padlet as well so that we can all capture all of those great ideas. But in the interest of time, we might move on to our second last question for today, and that is, what are the potential benefits and costs of bringing academic integrity to the forefront of assessment design and teaching practice? And Wayne, we might start with you on this, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I think again we've talked a lot about the potential benefits, in terms of our assessment design and all of the great ideas that people have mentioned. So I want to focus a little bit more in terms of the costs. And I sort of already mentioned, the main one that I think before. And yeah, look, I can't help it. I want to have a bit of a go at the university here as well. What we need to do is have the time. And not just the time in terms of designing, and also the resources to enable us to do that. So access to educational developers, etc. The university is improving in those things, but yeah, more could still be done. But more importantly, the time to assess properly, which I'm afraid in large courses, academics never have at the end of the semester. 2 weeks is not enough time. If you are to invent and use proper, authentic assessment tasks, if you are to assess them properly, if you are to provide sufficient feedback to students, that all takes a lot of investment by the institution, and it takes a lot of time for academics, and that has to be made allowances for. And currently, and for a number of years, it just hasn't been at the end of the semester here at ANU.
Oh, absolutely, Wayne. And I think that applies not just at the end of semester, but across semester, especially for our casual sessional staff and the marking that they do throughout the semester. Royston.
Thank you. So when we think of the costs, of course, we've got to remember that if we've got assessment design that reduces, or hopefully, extremely significantly reduces academic misconduct, then there's a significant saving in time in the with the investigation of issues of academic misconduct. So, and we're much better off spending time designing assessment to support academic integrity than pursuing academic misconduct cases, because as I'm sure the associate deans and many of the staff here today know that these investigations can be very time consuming, especially when there are several in a single course. And of course, this often comes up exactly when the marking load is highest at the end of semester. So it also helps smooth the workload, because the assessment can be designed before the semester begins, and then we don't get academic integrity investigations when we're actually at our busiest as we're trying to finalize these semester's results. So just to say that that there is that, even though there is a cost to the work to design assessment strategies for academic integrity, it will hopefully lead to that significant saving as well.
Thanks, Royston. All right, we've had some great discussion so far, but now it's your opportunity to ask any question you'd like about academic integrity to our panelists if we haven't covered it yet. So please add them to the final column in Padlet. We can share that link in the chat one more time, and I'm just going to switch across to the Padlet, and let's see if we can pick a couple of questions before we run out of time. So Tara, is there any particular question? We seem to have two questions here about artificial intelligence. Is there a sort of a general theme we can perhaps draw from those two to put to our panel?
Well, mostly it's about, at the moment it's just artificial intelligence. So please feel free to pop your questions in, because it's something hard to comment on because we don't have access to that at ANU Library or SIS. So it's not really something we can comment on. I don't know if any lecturers have any experience with that, but we certainly don't. But yeah, I'll have a look as people fill in any questions they have. It's great having all the staff together, sort of a brains trust of ideas for when we're looking at these issues that everyone's facing. It's good to know it's not just one college. A lot of colleges tend to think, oh, it's worse in my college than another college or that. But yeah, knowing it's sort of happening everywhere and in different ways, and that it's being tackled is also really useful. I think that some people are having more success. I can see a lot more innovation in terms of assessment design, even than we had this discussion last year. I think it was early September last year. There's a lot more innovation happening. There's some stuff going on in the chat. Sorry.
Yep. Thanks, Tara. Look, while we're waiting for some other questions to come through, if any panelists have any final thoughts they'd like to share with everyone today, please feel free to do so.
Oh, there's a good one here. Is how does ANU tackle cross-institution plagiarism? Which is just, tricky. Even within courses, it's difficult. At a history, course, someone might, really recycle an assignment and submit it again. But cross-institutional is very hard to prove. Has anyone had experience with that? It got 2 thumbs up very quickly. So I'm imagining that's something that is happening. Just if any of our panelists want to talk to that, or perhaps even Royston. It is tricky. I know Turnitin does sort of compile all of those things, but it is more challenging.
I can speak to this briefly, but
Sure.
I hope others might want to. I actually haven't had any issues with, I see students who have had poor academic practice in other colleges, if that's what you mean, and that's on the transcript. And so ASQO is actually really helpful to talk to if there are issues across the university with somebody who's plagiarized in different colleges. If you mean cross-institutional by whole of ANU versus, at ANU versus other institutions, I think that's a different question. But ASQO, just emailing integrity can give you a lot of guidance about even the nature of the the breach, if a breach has occurred previously. I hope that's the an answer to that question. Yeah.
Thanks, Lucy. Royston?
As noted, work is in Turnitin, but this would seem to relate specifically to recycling of work. So work that's been submitted at a different institution for assessment that's then submitted at ANU, and yes, especially if the other institution isn't using Turnitin, that's going to be virtually impossible to determine. If there happened to be a very similar question set at another institution. We would hope not to see so much of it between bachelor and master's degrees, because at master's degrees, we're expecting a high level of analysis. And so, recycling an undergraduate piece of assessment is likely not to meet the high level learning outcomes and so get a lower grade. So there's a bit of a disincentive there. But, there are some issues like that that are, especially if it's a student's own work, that's going to make it virtually impossible to detect.
Thanks for that, Royston and Lucy. We will keep that Padlet open for about another week or so. So if you have any other questions or thoughts, please do share that on there, and we hope we can get back to you with something valuable sooner rather than later. But we hope you found this discussion today to be incredibly valuable for you and your various approaches and practices. We do have some additional resources that you might find valuable. We will be sharing these slides so that you can use those links to access these sources directly yourself if you require. But other than that, thank you very much for all of your contributions, your questions, sharing your insights and experiences. Thank you to our fantastic panel. This has been incredibly invaluable. I know I have learnt a lot. And we hope that we'll see everybody at this afternoon session starting at 1:30, Zatera, with our guest speaker, Dr. Rowena Harper from Curtin University in WA. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic lunch, and we'll see you shortly.